My father abused me as a child and now he needs my help. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other. My father, a man of strict principles, believed that physical punishment was an integral part of parenting. He was not a raging drunk or a violent man, but it was normal for him to punish me when, in his opinion, I did something wrong. In his mind, such methods were character building. At my 15, I already knew I needed to find an answer. Questions had long been building up inside me like a ball of threads, tangled and pulling toward one point: my father. Why could the man I thought was my protector, the one who was supposed to be my most reliable bulwark, be so cruel to me? I could not keep silent any longer. The incomprehension tormented me from the inside. Every day, waking up thinking about how it was that love could turn into pain, I asked myself the same questions. How could you hurt someone you supposedly loved so much? And then one day, gathering all my resolve, I approached him. The words stuck in my throat, but I forced myself to speak. Why? I asked quietly, looking him straight in the eye. His gaze was cold, without a hint of remorse. He answered simply, "It's how I teach you." The words came out of the blue. I stood before him, stunned. The realization that this was all just part of his strange parenting methodology weighed heavily on me. The realization was more painful than any physical punishment. It was clear to me that I had never been a real daughter to him. Instead, I had become an object for his cruel pedagogical experiments. My soul, which had recently longed for love and warmth, now felt empty. It seemed to me that the whole world around me was collapsing, leaving only a cold reality where even the closest people could be strangers. The beginning of the mold. One day, I brought in a failing grade. My transcript had more or less a good grade on it. I thought it was a good result. But the memory of my father telling me to bring a belt still makes my cheekbones pucker. I used to obediently follow him without any resistance, but that day I refused. Daring to ask why he was beating me for mistakes, was he being punished at work for lack of diligence? Surprise, shock and anger mixed in his facial expression at that moment. He was beating me with extreme cruelty that day, and I felt pain and hatred towards him once again. "So I'd know how to open my mouth at my father," he said, not noticing that I was just defending myself, trying to understand why things had turned out so badly. From that time on, fear became an integral part of my life. I didn't just fear, I looked for ways to avoid confronting it. I tried to act right, to be what he wanted me to be. But inside me burned a desire to be rid of this tyranny. Often he liked to taunt me by saying that he should beat me on Saturdays, too, so that I wouldn't spoil myself. It was these words that made me reflect on my life, and questions arose about how long this could go on. By the time I turned 24, I was still staying at my father's house, carefully hiding my true feelings. I had learned to disguise myself, posing as that a proper daughter he dreamed of. Every morning when I left the house, I would banish thoughts of who I really was, hiding my true self under a layer of artificially created perfection. I knew I had to conform to the rules my father had set, but at the same time, I felt like I was living in a parallel reality, full of fear and depression. Every time I returned to my house after school or work, I was truly terrified, anticipating that he would be waiting for me again, ready to teach me another lesson. Why am I remembering all this again now, in my 40s and 50s? I became my own person, started a family with a loving husband and 2 adorable children, and found a good job. I tried to pattern my life, climbing out of the dark shadows of childhood horrors. But just a month ago, disaster struck. My father had a stroke, and everything changed dramatically. My mother, panicked and distraught, insisted that I come home and help her clean up her room. She wanted me to move in with them and take over the care of my father, who was now partially paralyzed. Considering that she herself is not young and unable to cope with his physical needs, she felt it was exactly my responsibility. She didn't realize how difficult it would be for me to accept her demands. All those years spent in fear and depression came over me again like a relentless flood. My mother kept reminding me with conviction that I had to support our family, but I knew it wasn't just a demand. It meant that I would once again have to immerse myself in the dark memories of my childhood that I was trying to escape from. Every time she called me ungrateful, I felt fear rise up in me, clutching my throat. Thinking about having to live under the same roof with the father who had once punished me so cruelly, I felt my body stiffen with terror. The realization that he wouldn't even be able to hurt me physically was no comfort. Just having him around and remembering him was enough to revive the horrible images of my childhood. I tried to block out my emotions, but now they were creeping back to the surface like tidal water. After all, the only thing I could do for my father was to make sure he had a decent place to live in a nursing home. That was all I could do. I couldn't be there for him, and while it was easy to talk about my situation, it was actually riddled with complexities and invisible scars that left blackness in my soul and life. My mother kept calling, and her screams seemed like an incessant storm from which it was impossible to escape. She rebuked me for being willing to give up on my father. Phrases about how I would look him in the eye, or that someday my own children would leave me in a nursing home, were heard constantly. I asked questions about the substance of the case but got no answers, hanging up the phone each time, feeling the dark thoughts engulf me once again. I'll never forget how I just wanted someone to come and protect me when things were bad. She reminded me how they fed and clothed me, but what was behind those words I could only guess. We lived on a small farm with a vegetable garden, where I worked as much as the adults, doing my chores. Now, I needed medical services and treatment, which cost a lot of money. What did my parents give me? The ability to have an existential terror of men. I love my husband. He is a kind and gentle man, and has no idea how I flinch whenever he raises his voice. Not because he's angry, but just because he dropped something and expressed his displeasure. I jump up on the spot, each time expecting to be hit again. Every movement, every action is filled with fear. I feel my body tense up, preparing for another blow. My brain is working at full speed, going over possible reasons. Maybe I forgot to lock the door? Or maybe I left a stain on the floor. These thoughts flash one after another, like frames of an old movie playing in fast forward. I try to recall every detail of my day, analyzing where I might have made a mistake. But no matter how hard I try, there's no answer. Because it's not about what I did wrong at all. It's that this fear has become an integral part of my life. This habit of always looking for a reason to punish me, like a tiny worm that has settled deep in my mind, does not want to go away. Even years later, when I am a grown woman, these moments keep coming back to me in the form of memories that are impossible to get rid of. They stay with me like wounds that won't heal, reminding me of a past that I want to forget. Despite long hours of talking to psychologists, trying to understand myself through books and meditation, this anxiety doesn't go away. The pills help to dull the sensations a little, but they can't erase the memories that are forever imprinted in my mind. Although my father is no longer able to lift a spoon, his physical limitations don't lessen the inner tension I regularly feel. I still fear that he may reappear in my life, and all the horror I had sincerely hoped to put behind me may return. At the same time, I feel bitter and hurt that as I delve deeper into my thoughts, I realize that the image of a father who could have supported me through difficult times is missing. I had gotten used to not having that father who was there for me, who would hug and encourage me if I came to him with my problems. When I found out that my father had been transferred to a nursing home after being discharged from the hospital, I set up an automatic payment through a banking app to care for him. My presence was not required. My mother continued to call, repeating her threats that I could turn her into, and also insinuating that she wasn't going to help me with my children if I ever asked her for help. Involuntarily, I burst out laughing nervously, because they weren't really that helpful. They didn't have the time. Sometimes they took the kids in when they didn't have to go to class and didn't need to be watched. Every time I look at my children, I ask myself the question, can I break this cycle of violence and fear? Can love replace the lack that I myself have experienced throughout my life? I try to be the mother I never had, but the fear stays with me. If you are raising a child and you are convinced that I was beaten and I grew up normal, know this, it is a delusion. Being normal does not mean being indifferent to the suffering of others. You can either grow up to be a monster like my father or a broken person like I became. Maybe true strength lies not in continuing to live by old habits, but in changing them.